Time Walk with me.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Time Walk with me. I'm the Time Walker, and this is a very special episode because it is a collaboration with a channel called Commander Philosophy. You'll find a link to his channel in the description. If you like what I do, you should like his videos too. And that rhymes. Too bad. Too bad for you. We work together on this deck, which fittingly has partner commanders. I'll list off the categories and cards in those categories, and I'll leave it to Commander Philosophy to explain them and the deck's strategy. Eligeth, Crossroads Augur. Since I chose this commander, I'll explain it. Eligeth, Crossroads Augur is a 5/6 Flying Sphinx that costs 2 blue mana and 4 generic. It replaces all of your scry effects with drawing. That means if a card says to scry 3, you instead draw 3 cards. Why would you want to do that? Are you really asking that question? Drawing is an important part of Commander. How do you not know that? Kydele, Chosen of Kruphix.
Kydele, Chosen of Kruphix is our second commander and really helps to value off of card draw. For each card we draw, we are able to tap Kydele for another additional colorless mana. This pairs quite well with Eligeth as we're changing scry into draw, siphoning more and more value into Kydele's mana ability. This allows us to tap for an absurd amount of mana that we will be able to use to cast a plethora of different spells. Scry is a very important aspect of the deck, and we have a great selection of cards and aspects to talk about.
Netherese Puzzle Ward.
Netherese Puzzle Ward is the first instance of something I like to refer to as stable scry. In simple terms, we are guaranteed, unless destroyed, to scry a certain amount of times at some point during our turn. For Puzzle Ward, we'll get to scry for 1d4 at our upkeep. With Eligeth, this scry gets converted into a card draw engine, amassing incremental value throughout a game.
Prognostic Sphinx.
Prognostic Sphinx gives us a great scry 3 ability as he attacks, meaning that for his mana cost, he could generate massive amounts of free value throughout a game. He also has a great form of protection on himself, that should we be willing to pitch a card, we can tap him and give him hexproof should opponents start coming after him.
Retreat to Coralhelm.
Retreat to Coralhelm holds some great versatility for our strategy in a few different ways. We could consider it to be a form of stable scry with us playing a land every turn, but Retreat also allows us to untap a creature. Pairing this effect with Kydele makes our mana generation quite explosive, as we essentially get a free additional tap from her with just playing a land.
Nissa, Steward of Elements.
Nissa, Steward of Elements is the first of 2 different planeswalkers that we will be talking about in this deck. To start, we can mana dump into her to give her a ton of loyalty counters. Her +2 offers some scry, and her -6 gives us some beaters through our lands. However, the main ability I would like to look towards is her 0. With this ability, should we not have access to Eligeth and are only scrying, we have the potential ability to cheat in massive creatures.
Jace, Mirror Mage.
Jace Mirror Mage is our second planeswalker and offers a lot of scry potential. For 5 mana, including Kicker, we get 2 Jaces and the potential to scry 4 off their +1 ability. We will tend to never need the 0 ability as we have plenty of card draw as is, but there is really no other card in the deck that can offer this much potential stable scry in the deck, which has all the potential to catapult us away with the game.
Aqueous Form.
Aqueous Form is a mean little aura that not only allows us to scry when we attack, but also gives us a chance to give one of our creatures unblockable.
Omen Speaker.
Omen Speaker is one of the creatures that we run with scry as an ETB trigger. This creature is good for this, but acts as a good early blocker and can be bumped by some of the effects in the deck to attempt to be a bit of a beater later on.
Mystic Speculation.
Mystic Speculation is a great component if we have both of our commanders out. Should we be willing to spend mana in increments of 4, then we can have a recursive scry 3 effect replaced to be a draw 3 and a tap for 3. Should we pay an extra mana to recast it, these values double, drawing us 6 cards and tapping for 6 for an altogether cost of 5 mana.
Reason/Believe.
Reason and Believe has some great flexibility for us to utilize. First, scry 3 for 1 mana is hard value to try and match, and made better with Eligeth. But should we scry 3 and cast Believe from our graveyard, we can potentially hit a huge creature to essentially get a huge mana reduction for our creature, and a safe way to get around counterspells from our opponents.
Preordain.
Preordain and some similar cards in the deck work great with Eligeth. Without him, we get a decent effect of scry 2 and draw 1. However, with him, we get what basically boils down to an ancestral recall.
Augury Owl.
Augury Owl, like Omen Speaker, gives us an ETB scry effect on a flying body. Ultimately, Owl is much better than Omen Speaker, as we may scry 3 and have the capacity to block a flying threat.
I think it's called Condescend.
Condescend is quite an interesting and flexible counterspell. Should we have enough mana to counter something, then it's a great option to have available, but we can also cast it for just a blue. Doing so will simply get us the Scry 2 effect, which in some cases could be exactly what we're looking for.
Serum Visions.
Serum Visions, much like Preordain, lets us draw 1 and Scry 2, and with Eligeth can draw 3. I will say though, Preordain will likely be better overall, as it gets to scry first, then draw, giving a little selection to the draw.
Behold the Multiverse.
Behold the Multiverse is a great effect, especially if we can use the Foretell ability. For 2 mana early and 2 mana later, we have the potential to draw 4 cards and tap for 4, netting us 2 additional mana that we can use for one of our bigger spells.
In Search of Greatness.
In Search of Greatness is a great enchantment that cares about growing an incremental value from our permanents at our upkeep. This card allows us to cast cards for free, and should we not be able to cast a card that is 1 higher mana value than our highest permanent, then we can scry 1 instead.
Thassa, God of the Sea.
Thassa, God of the Sea, though a form of stable scry, can act as one of our best beaters, and gives us a nice mana sink ability that we can utilize to make our massive creatures unblockable.
Lifecrafter's Bestiary. Or Bestiary? I don't know.
Lifecrafter's Bestiary is another form of stable scry that we can take advantage of, but also allows us to get a little more value out of casting our creatures by letting us draw a card should we be willing to pay 1 green mana.
Elven Farsight.
Elven Farsight is kinda like Serum Visions and Preordain, but much better. For 1 green mana, we have the potential to draw 4 cards and net 3 mana if both our commanders are out. This is potentially the best cantrip in the deck, because it could be used in the early game to dig rather deep to look for pieces that we need to set up, or make us very explosive in the late game.
Crystal Ball.
Crystal Ball is a simple but rather effective card. It can help us smooth out draws in the early game, and later in the game can potentially draw us 2 cards and let us tap for 2 mana should we have both our commanders on the field.
Omen of the Sea.
Omen of the Sea gives us a lot of scry to utilize. With its ETB, we'll get to scry 2 and draw a card. But we can also sacrifice Omen to scry 2 more, which can be held to utilize with our commander or help us in the early setup.
Foresee.
Foresee is one of the best cards for the amount of value it can generate overall. For 4 mana and our commanders on the field, we can draw 6 cards and tap for 6 mana, overall netting us 2 mana. This card is quite explosive in the deck as it can generate unmatchable value.
Tamiyo's Epiphany.
Tamiyo's Epiphany is essentially another version of Foresee. The more effects that we can get like this in the deck, the better off we will be overall, as it sets as a great piece for play.
And Opt.
Opt is our instant speed scry and draw. This lets us hold a little extra mana should we have Kydele and Eligeth on the field, letting our interaction be a little more than what our opponents may think we have. I think we talked plenty about card advantage in the deck. Now, let's look at the meat of the deck by talking about our win condition through bruisers.
Triplicate Titan.
Triplicate Titan is potentially one of the best beaters that we have in the deck. With it, we get a 9/9 with flying and trample. It makes as an incredible attacker that, with vigilance, can also be a fantastic blocker. Titan also gives a little more when it dies, as we create 3 3/3s with separate keyword abilities from Triplicate Titan.
Desolation Twin.
Desolation Twin is a mean creature that once we cast him, we'll get 2 10/10s. This notably gets around counterspell, as Twin's effect is a cast trigger, meaning that opponents will need a normal counterspell, as well as a Stifle-like counter to stop Twin completely.
Hydra Broodmaster.
Hydra Broodmaster is a bit of a personal favorite as it comes from the original Theros, and offers a lot of potential stomping power. With him, we get a 7/7, but with his monstrous ability, we can not only buff him, but also get a few Hydra tokens out of the deal depending on the amount of mana that we would like to invest.
Torrential Gearhulk.
Torrential Gearhulk can be a bit of a sneaky play, as we're able to cast him at flash speed. With his ability, and should we have a few instants in our graveyard to utilize, we will have recursive interaction and a great blocker that our opponents will have to deal with.
It That Betrays.
It That Betrays is a disgusting creature being an 11/11 with Annihilator 2. This alone can make the creature fantastic, but he also has the ability that pairs great with Annihilator. Should an opponent sacrifice a permanent, instead of it going to the graveyard, it will come to our side of the battlefield instead, allowing us to create a very diverse board state from our opponents.
Phyrexian Triniform.
Phyrexian Triniform is a hard beater to contend with. To start, he is a 9/9 that when he dies, he creates 3 3/3s. This, however, is not what makes him so great. He also holds Encore for 12 mana that allows us to play 3 copies of himself with haste that must be sacrificed at the end of the turn. Should we have all opponents still around when we use Encore, then we can produce 9 3/3s once we sacrifice the copies.
Nezahal Primal Tide.
Nizal Primal Tide is a great 7/7 utility beater. First, he gives no maximum hand size, and draws us cards on our opponent's turns. He also has an ability that can protect him and make use of dead cards in our hand. Should we want, we can discard 3 and exile him until the end step, allowing us to get around targeted removal and board wipes.
Darksteel Colossus.
Darksteel Colossus is very simple and to the point. He's an 11/11 with trample and indestructible, and should our opponents find a way to destroy him, then he will be shuffled back into the deck to potentially be a threat later in the game.
Psychosis Crawler.
Psychosis Crawler is a bit of a special beater. With Eligeth, all of our card draw from Scry turns into damage threat for our opponents. With such, there are going to be times that we can deal anywhere from 5 to 15 damage to each opponent a turn, should we set up our Scry to draw correctly. Also, the amount of cards in hand buff this card quite well, allowing us to beat down opponents after having drawn and dealing a crazy amount of damage to begin with.
Thunderfoot Baloth.
Thunderfoot Baloth is a great creature for the deck that buffs our board and himself by giving +2/+2 and trample to every creature we control, so long as we have one of our commanders out on the field. This is a rather easy and effective condition considering that we are running 2 different commanders.
And Nylea, God of the Hunt.
Nylea, God of the Hunt is a special beater as she offers quite a bit to our strategy. First, she is a decent creature being a 6/6, but she also offers trample to all of our other creatures. She also offers a mana sink ability that we can use to pump our creatures for a bit of extra damage. Ramp is very important for the deck as we have huge spells that we'd like to reliably cast each turn.
Thought Vessel.
Thought Vessel is our first piece of ramp that gives us a little utility, allowing us to have no maximum hand size. We'll definitely need this ability should Eligeth go crazy with Scry.
Omen of the Hunt.
Omen of the Hunt is a nice card to have as it does grant us some land acceleration, but can also be sacrificed to Scry 2 for our commanders later on.
Cultivate.
Cultivate is another land accelerator that not only lets us search and put a basic onto the battlefield, but also gets us one for our hand, letting us either make our land drop in the current turn or in the next turn.
Kodama's Reach.
Kodama's Reach is essentially another version of Cultivate, but this effect is a little too good for us to pass up as we do have landfall triggers in the deck that can synergize quite well with this card.
Rampant Growth.
Rampant Growth is the simplest form of land acceleration, as for 2 mana we can go find another land and put it onto the battlefield. One thing that should be noted is if we don't like the cards from the top of our library from the scries that we're doing, then we can shuffle the deck and reset to hopefully find better cards.
Arcane Signet.
Arcane Signet is a classic all-star that is a nice piece of ramp that taps according to our color identity.
Soul Ring.
Soul Ring, though doesn't need much of an introduction, is a simple yet very effective piece of ramp. For 1 mana, we can produce 2 mana, netting 1 in total. Playing this into another piece of ramp like Arcane Signet is quite strong as we can accelerate out of control.
Sakura Tribe Elder.
Sakura Tribe Elder is a great tool in our ramp selection. With this ability, we're able to assign him as a blocker, and in response to the damage, can sacrifice him to find a basic land to enter the battlefield tapped. Essentially, Elder is good for damage mitigation and ramp. Interaction is key to any deck, and this one is no different.
Krosan Grip.
Krosan Grip is one of the best options that we have for artifact and enchantment removal, as this card is very hard to interact with since it has split second.
Sapphire Dragon.
Sapphire Dragon is a great card and works a bit as interaction, utility, and being able to be a great beater. With it, we can counter a non-creature spell, and later have it enter as a 5/6 flyer that can scry 2 when it attacks or blocks, giving us a lot of flexibility.
Emerald Dragon.
Emerald Dragon, much like Sapphire Dragon, can counter the activated or triggered ability of a non-creature source. This can be a little tricky, but can stop effects like Beseiju in a way opponents may never expect. We can also cast him later to be a bit of a beater, being a 4/4 flyer with trample.
Counterspell.
Counterspell is our tried and true form of interaction. The fear that our opponents will have for having 2 blue mana open could dissuade opponents from casting some of their larger, game-ending cards, with us being able to stop next to anything.
Dissolve.
Dissolve is another one of our counterspells, however the only difference here is that it holds Scry 1. This can be good, especially if we have both our commanders on the field, and a little more interaction or instant speed cards that we can play.
Reclamation Sage.
Reclamation Sage, though just a small 2/2, has a fantastic ETB trigger that allows us to destroy any artifact or enchantment.
Curse of the Swine.
Curse of the Swine is our option for a quote-unquote board wipe. This card is special though, as instead of destroying creatures, it instead exiles them, ensuring that threats will never be seen again.
Beast Within.
Beast Within is a nice piece of targeted removal that catches any permanent without indestructible. Though it does make a 3/3, with us being a creature-focused deck, we will never need to worry about it.
And Pongify. Pongify? I think it's Pongify.
Pognify, similar to Beast Within, will destroy any creature for only 1 mana and generates a 3/3 token in its place. This is great for its low cost efficiency, as we can mitigate a lot of damage or take away a key creature from an opponent. To continue into our next section, we will be utilizing Green Recursion. This is great as green allows us to grab any card from our graveyard and use it once again.
Eternal Witness.
Eternal Witness is a notable green all-star that, as it enters the battlefield, we not only get a body for attacking and blocking, but also get a aforementioned card from our graveyard back to our hand.
Noxious Revival.
Noxious Revival is flexible for a few reasons. Though we will be generating large amounts of mana, there will be times when we want to use all available mana. And though we can pay a green mana, likely we'd like to be able to cast it for 2 life instead. The only downside to Noxious Revival is that the card that we select is put on top of our library instead of our hand.
And Balaged Recovery / Balaged Sanctuary.
Balaged Recovery and Balaged Sanctuary, similar to our other recursion pieces, will get us a card from our graveyard back to our hand. However, should we run into a situation where we're really needing a land, then we can opt to flip this card and use its backside. Utility is quite important in this deck, as the support it offers our creatures and commanders is unparalleled.
Blue Sun Zenith.
Blue Sun Zenith is one of our better options for mana dumping. Should we play this with Kydele and have an untap effect, we can generate huge amounts of mana to play out our hand quite effectively.
Freed from the Real.
Freed from the Real is an aura that works perfectly with Kydele. When we place it on her, we can tap and untap her for a ridiculous amount of mana. This will work rather well to play out our hand or sink mana into some effects that we have in the deck.
Wizard Class.
Wizard Class gives us a lot of versatility. To start, it gives no maximum hand size and draws us some cards, but we should really be looking towards the last ability, as when we draw cards, we will be getting some extra value by being able to place 1/1 counters on creatures that we control, giving us a little extra stomp.
Lightning Greaves.
Lightning Greaves is one of the best forms of utility that we can give our creatures, and especially our commanders. With Greaves, we can immediately attack with a creature we just played, or tap Kydele as soon as she enters. We also give Shroud to these creatures, which can be very difficult for our opponents to interact with, but should be careful as we ourselves are not able to target the creature either.
Staff of Domination.
Staff of Domination is the definitive best mana sink that we have in the deck, and for good reason. This card allows us to gain life, tap and untap creatures, and draw us cards. Also, a little tech to look at is if we have drawn 5 cards and have Kydele on the field, then we can generate infinite mana, having the potential to either draw our entire deck or tap down the whole battlefield.
Kiora's Follower.
Kiora's Follower is a simple card that gives us an untap effect. Though this is strong with Kydele, we shouldn't understate how well this card can be as a pseudo vigilance effect for our beaters.
Omniscience.
Omniscience is one of the best options for a game ender. This card allows us to play all of our beaters and scribe with none of the cost, freeing up all of our available mana for mana sinks and mana dumps.
Chasm Skulker.
Chasm Stalker is a nice little creature that values and becomes a great beater off of the amount of cards that we draw. He also has a nice effect that creates a potentially very wide board should he ever be destroyed by our opponents.
And Court of Calling.
Court of Calling is one of the best creature tutors that we can have in the deck. With it being an instant, we can use it in response to bring in a fantastic blocker, or have ready to attack in our next turn. Lands in the deck can be quite flexible, and hold a lot of utility that we can utilize.
Isolated Watchtower.
Isolated Watchtower is a great piece of ramp on a land. With its ability, not only do we get to scry to, but also reveal the top card of our deck, and may have it enter the battlefield if it's a basic land.
Study Hall.
Study Hall has an ability that gets incrementally better as we play through the game. If our commanders are receiving a lot of hate, for each time we cast one with this ability, we get to scry that many times as well.
Castle Vantress.
Castle Vantress has an activated ability that lets us scry 2. This can work well if we have our commanders and a means of untapping Kydele for a little extra value. The ability is quite expensive mana-wise though, and should really only be used as a last resort.
Command Beacon.
Command Beacon is, per se, our commander insurance. Should our commanders be receiving a lot of hate, we can sacrifice Command Beacon to bring one of our commanders back to our hand without having to pay commander tax.
Yavimaya Coast.
Yavimaya Coast is a nice land for a little bit of mana fixing, as the 1 damage really isn't something that we'll need to care about with us starting with 40 life.
Mystic Sanctuary.
Mystic Sanctuary is a fantastic piece of instant and sorcery recursion. With it, we can make sure our interaction and great scry spells can once again be utilized and push our strategy a little further.
Command Tower.
Command Tower really needs no discussion. It's one of the best lands that can be played in a multicolor deck, as it's a land that enters untapped and taps for any color in our color identity.
Path of Ancestry.
Path of Ancestry, though is ran for its mana fixing, does come with an additional scry ability that should we play a creature that shares a type with our commander, then we may scry 1. We probably won't see this ability a lot, but it's another option that we can and should take advantage of.
Reliquary Tower.
Reliquary Tower is a nice utility land that gives us no maximum hand size. It's especially great as opponents may have a hard time trying to deal with it, and lets us not care when we're drawing massive amounts of cards.
Temple of Mystery.
Temple of Mystery is a little piece of utility that can be used in a lot of different ways. It can help us set up our early game with the Scry 1. It can draw us a card with Eligeth, and it can produce a mana with Kydele, all just for playing the land. Islands and Forest are just our basics that we're running. To be exact, we are running 13 islands and 9 forests to make up our mana base.
Rivendell.
Rivendell is another nice utility land that lets us scry 2 for 2 mana should we control a legendary creature. This condition is quite easy to get around as we are running 2 commanders.
And Quandrix Campus.
Quandrix Campus is much like Castle Vantress, however, we'll only get to scry 1 with the ability. Really, we're looking to try and mana fix with this card, but this ability could be a great means of digging through the deck a little should we need it.
So there we have it. That is our Eligeth Crossroads Augur and Kydele Chosen of Kruphix deck. Tell me what you think. Tell me and Commander Philosophy what you think. And go check out his channel. Give him some subscribers. I'll see you next time.